most famous runaway and rebel leader was a man named Yunga, the founder of this town, which is located a few hours inland from Veracruz. Private, who is Yunga?
A hero more than anything.
A black slave. Supposedly, he was a slave of the Spanish who broke the chains.
He freed himself from oppression that the Spanish had over him. And he also liberated the slaves.
What my girlfriend said.
That's why they call Yunga the first free town in the Americas.
Oh man, give me 5, Gustavo. You're the man. You're a genius. You could be a professor. In 1570, 50 years before the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock, Gaspar Yunga and several other men and women not only ran away from slavery, but spent 30 years hiding out in the mountains around Veracruz, attacking the Spanish in guerrilla raids and defending their community. The Spanish never could subdue them. Finally, in 1609, the Spanish admitted defeat and offered Yunga his own independent town in exchange for peace. Yunga's settlement became what some scholars believe to be the very first town founded by free black people in all of the Americas. Are most of the people around here black?
No. Well, most people aren't completely black, but we are morenos.
Cultures, they combine together and form others.
So what are you? What are you?
Mestizos. Mestizos because we're light brown.
Are you moreno? Are you moreno or no?
Look.
What are you, Indian?
I am black.
You're negra? Sí. You're a very beautiful negra.
In 1886, in the blazing summer heat, 39 Apaches raced across the desert Southwest, chased by 5,000 American soldiers. They were the only Indian people in the entire nation still fighting the U.S. Army. For many months, the handful of men, women, and children evaded capture, running, running, then running some more, as much as 80 miles a day. Across the nation, Americans were horrified by details of the chase, some real, many exaggerated. 39 people were on the run that summer, but the soldiers were really after only one man. To his hunters, he was a vicious killer, capable of murdering without mercy. To the Apaches, he was more complex, courageous yet vengeful, an unyielding protector of his family's freedom, yet the cause of his people's greatest suffering. In the course of the chase and in the years that followed, he would become a legend and the symbol of the untamed freedom of the American West. His name was Geronimo. Not long after the vicious murder of his family, a despondent Geronimo ventured deep into Chiricahua country. Alone, he buried his head in his hands and began to cry. Suddenly, he was startled by a voice. "No gun will ever kill you," it said. "I will take the bullets from the guns of the Mexicans, and I will guide your arrows." Geronimo later said that he had been given what Apache people call power, a gift from Usen.
The concept of power is fundamental in Apache belief. Everybody acknowledges that somebody has a certain power, like the power of medicine, the power of healing, the power of seeing or feeling something in a distance.
There were people that knew where you were, people that knew about horses, people that knew about hunting, We call this power.
Dark Eudi was a year of Selande. I'll candy. Does not lila. And there I'll candy. Two not at lila guy. Guyanle was then a eta. Yen den lila yen celebs ionina.
Soon after the voice spoke to him, Geronimo put his power into action. He got permission from the Chiricahua chiefs to take revenge for the massacre at Janos. With a force of 200 men, he lured the Mexican soldiers who had killed his family into battle. Leading the charge through a hail of bullets, Geronimo whirled and dodged, killing with his knife when his arrows ran out.
So he's dashing back and forth, running this zigzag pattern, and obviously scaring the daylights out of the Mexicans. They have never run into an antagonist quite like this guy.
I don't care what you put up against him. He'll come after you. That's the kind of fighter he was. He was a true-blooded Chiricahua fighter. And he said he wasn't scared of bullets. That I heard from my grandpa.
Geronimo and his men decimated the enemy. From that day forward, Mexicans would shudder at his name. But when Spanish gold mines were rediscovered in the Southwest, American prospectors came to stay.
The miners that descend on Arizona are mostly a lawless bunch of people.
Mining camps are full of young men who are almost completely beyond any social bounds. They are one of the worst places in the American West. They are absolutely full of racism. Miners are disastrous for most Native American people.
Some miners were barbarous, poisoning the Apaches' food with strychnine, cutting fetuses out of the bellies of pregnant women, selling Apache girls into slavery. When Americans decapitated a venerated Apache chief and sent his boiled skull back east as a gruesome trophy, they pushed Cochise too far.
He believed in punishing someone that was wrong and in punishing people that were responsible for, his people dying or getting hurt. He wasn't going to let anybody take advantage of him or his people.
Cochise urged Geronimo and the Chiricahuas to take revenge. All of the Indians agreed not to be friendly with the white man anymore, Geronimo later said. Sometimes we attacked the white men, sometimes they attacked us. The Chiricahuas ambushed stagecoaches and wagon trains, mutilating their victims, smashing heads with rocks, stabbing corpses with their spears, dangling bodies over fires. Instead of treating native tribes as sovereign nations, as the U.S. had been doing for more than a century, Indians would now be wards of the state. Over the next decade, the American Army would force tribe after tribe onto reservations.
The reservation becomes this dominant way of containing Indian people. This place where Indian people can be contained and then worked on, right? Transformed and changed so that they can have a future within American society.
Crook's strategy was as simple as it was difficult to enforce. His basic idea was that if Apache people would stay on their reservations, he would do everything he could to make their lives comfortable. But those who refused and who continued raiding, he vowed to hunt down to the very last man.
10 years earlier, the Apaches' neighbors, the Navajos, had faced a similar choice: comply with the American demands or fight. The Navajos chose war. After a brutal military campaign, the American army forced them into submission. Survivors were marched off their ancestral land to a distant reservation. Along the way, hundreds died of starvation and disease. Apaches knew this history well.
The Navajo people and Apache people knew one another. They shared information. There was a whole network of information exchange between the tribes in the area.
Many Apaches reluctantly agreed to settle on reservations. Crook played Apaches against each other. He offered them incentives to become scouts for the U.S. Army and lead the hunt for Apaches who refused to give in.
Yeah, we you in dad. It's a lot of quick kind of no teen of Janana and Tana with Lindy. Ewa. Tapin are you scouts as little. Scouts really will take on a tea. The Scouts is near you, he take on a tea. Yeah, will you be so? And that baby so he cannot gee, can't be done ID. She was how much the lancing. How you shot the engineer lancing.
On April 21, 1877, Geronimo rode into Clum's carefully laid trap. As he arrived at Ojo Caliente, New Mexico to trade some horses, dozens of Apache scouts, including Cochise's son, Naichi, surrounded him. They carted him back to San Carlos in chains.
Would run and the women would ride the horses and follow. The Chiricahua people, you know, they could move 70 miles or 80 miles in one day, you know, where the cavalry that was following them a lot of times couldn't keep up.
They were running from the cavalry and they ran into these rocks and they turned themselves into rocks.
Among Geronimo's powers was the ability to suspend time and space. On one particular raid, he was actually able to hold off the dawn for a few hours, and so they could approach in darkness.
He thought he was going to die. He thought he would be executed.
He understands that he may not die in battle, something that his power tells him this will never happen. But it didn't say much about him dying at the end of a hangman's rope.
Clum threw Geronimo into the San Carlos guardhouse, confident that he would soon be hanged. But Clum was unexpectedly relieved of his command. The new reservation agent saw no need to keep Geronimo locked up. After 4 months, he was released from the guardhouse, but he was hardly free.
It didn't make sense to stay in an area with a large group of soldiers who you knew had a history of them trying to kill you.
On September 30th, 1881, accompanied by Ho and 72 Chiricahuas, Geronimo escaped from San Carlos and headed south. It was the beginning of 5 years of bloody Chiricahua resistance, the last Indian war ever fought on United States soil, and the transformation of Geronimo into a legend. One day in February 1909, the most famous Indian alive was riding home when he was thrown from his horse. He lay out in the freezing cold all night. When an old friend found him, Geronimo was gravely ill. He died 6 days later, still a prisoner of war. Although Americans celebrated him, Geronimo provoked complicated feelings in the hearts of many Apaches.
We have different perspectives on the man, who he was, how he lived his life, why he did what he did, and how that affected the rest of the tribe.
Apache people suffered because of him. We all suffered with him.
Most of the tribe were angry with him and they blamed him. We don't look at him as a hero.
He wasn't alone. And when these white people think about all these things that were going on, they should name all the group that was with him instead of just Geronimo, because he didn't do it alone.
And then there are a lot of other names also lost in history, lost in the canyons of Mexico, lost in the mountains of the Chiricahuas, names long forgotten.
While other Apaches remained in the Southwest, the Chiricahua had paid dearly for Geronimo's resistance. They were never allowed home.
Well, he killed a lot of people. Why is he remembered when he did all these bad things? It's because he put a mark on the American people. He put a scar on them.
In the end, even Geronimo had regrets. On his deathbed, he summoned his nephew to his side. "I should never have surrendered," the old man whispered. "I should have fought until I was the last man alive."
The country mobilized, but Negro enlistments were restricted. Once again, however, manpower needs overruled racial prejudice. The Army's highest-ranking Negro officer, Colonel Charles Young, was retired as physically unfit for duty, even though he rode horseback from Ohio to Washington, D.C. to prove his fitness. The American military remained segregated, and most black troops were commanded by whites. General John J. Pershing, commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, earned his nickname Blackjack as a commander of Negro troops before World War I. Pershing had no objections to black combat troops, but many high-ranking officers and government officials publicly questioned the black man's ability to fight. During the war, more than 370,000 Negroes were in uniform, 40,000 on the front lines. Most black soldiers were relegated to service units. They were laborers, ditch diggers, and stevedores. Now, the 1st Negro Combat Division overseas, the 93rd, went into battle April 1918, fighting under French command. Homegrown discrimination followed black soldiers into the trenches.
He held off a German attack with grenades, his rifle, a knife, and finally, his bare hands to protect a fellow soldier and his unit, the Harlem Hellfighters. Then Private Johnson was on sentry duty the night of May 15th with fellow soldier Private Needham Roberts. The two were attacked by a raiding party of at least a dozen Germans, and things quickly went south. Johnson fought bitterly to protect himself, his friend, and the Harlem Hellfighters and French soldiers they were with. Even after they were both wounded, Roberts fed Johnson hand grenades to unleash a hellish downpour on the Germans, giving deadly meaning to the phrase, "Make it rain." Johnson held the enemy off until they ran out of grenades and rifle rounds. At one point, the Germans even tried to abduct Roberts, but Johnson protected him with just a knife and personal grit. Johnson was eventually wounded 21 times during the fight, but he still managed to bring down several Germans, stabbing one of them through the head with a bolo knife. That's right, even severely wounded Johnson had the strength to shove a knife through a man's head. Johnson received the French Croix de Guerre and was eventually promoted to sergeant.
Private Henry Johnson, for his bravery in combat, actually hand-to-hand combat, he received France's highest honor.
The French didn't have the segregation policies that the American Army had at the time.
According to retired Major General Nathaniel James, the American Army didn't even award Johnson the Purple Heart for his wounds.
It was one of these bigotry things that, I guess for some reason, they didn't want blacks to get any kind of recognition.
Without a Purple Heart, the man Teddy Roosevelt called one of the bravest soldiers to fight in World War I received no assistance in dealing with his wounds.
As far as I know, he died as an alcoholic and penniless.
He was buried in Arlington and decades later awarded the Purple Heart and Distinguished Service Cross. Now, Medal of Honor will be added to that tombstone.